In the final dying months of the Third Reich, deep beneath a forgotten castle, a weapon was born, not to win the war, but to haunt the future. Buried by time, erased from record, and nearly launched into the heart of London. This is the story they never meant for you to hear. A rocket, a lie, a ghost named Revenant. The Ghosts of Liberation. The church bell rang twice, sharp and defiant, across the quiet fields of Normandy. For the villagers of Saint-Michel-du-Lac, it was a familiar sound, but for a small number of people hiding in its crypt, it was a signal. The time had come. Jacqueline Ferrat, once a literature teacher in Marseille, now known to British intelligence as Violet Echo, rose from her place among the shadows. Her coat was threadbare, the collar stained with ink and blood. Around her, for others stirred, resistance fighters, each bearing false names and lives. They were part of a covert Allied network called Mirage Blue, a ghost unit so secret not even all of SOE knew of its existence. Formed in 1943, Mirage Blue operated under direct orders from Section F of the British Special Operations Executive. Its mission: sabotage German infrastructure, gather intelligence from within rural France, and prepare local resistance cells for the eventual Allied invasion. Ferrat had been recruited after the Nazis executed her brother, a student organizer in Lyon. She had memorized entire volumes of Shakespeare and Voltaire as a girl, and now her mind was a weapon sharper than any blade. Her team was chosen not just for their courage but for their silence, people with nothing left to lose. Tonight, they would strike again. In the valley below, a German communications relay had been recently constructed, a series of telephone lines linking Omaha Beach to Cannes. It was part of a vast German defensive web known to the Allies as the Atlantic Wall. Disabling even a portion of it could delay reinforcements when the time came for the landings. "We have 7 minutes between the last patrol and the next," whispered Tomasz, a Polish Jew and former electrical engineer who had escaped a labor camp. His hands were blistered, but precise. Jacqueline nodded and checked her watch, an old gift from her father. No room for error. No sound. If we fail, it's not just our lives. The whole operation will collapse. They moved like phantoms. Through the woods, crawling through moss and rot, avoiding Nazi sentries by inches. They wore Wehrmacht boots, scavenged from dead soldiers, and smelled like wet hay to avoid detection by dogs. Near the relay station, Jacqueline planted the timed charge with trembling fingers. Every beat of her heart was a drumroll of fear. Above them, the sky was split by the occasional Allied reconnaissance plane, but no one would look down here. They were gone before the explosion came. The blast was not enormous, but it was precise. Enough to snap key lines and confuse the German defense grid. A few minutes later, a second explosion rocked the eastern road. Gaston, the team's explosives expert, had taken out the supply truck depot. They met back at the crypt beneath the church, where once priests had buried victims of the Black Plague. Now it was a war room. Jacqueline lit a single lantern and pulled out the transmitter, a modified wireless rig hidden inside a hollowed-out Bible. Tomasz twisted the dial carefully, adjusting for German frequency disruptions. Then she tapped the coded message. "Windmill ashes swept. Bell sings twice. The painter arrives soon." It was poetry, but it meant communications relay destroyed, secondary objective complete, green light for scheduled invasion. The bell was rung again the next morning, not for coded signals, but for mourning. The Nazis, furious, had descended on Saint-Michel and executed 5 villagers at random. One was a girl of 13 who had been seen near the woods. Another was an old man who refused to give his name. Jacqueline did not cry. She stood among the silent townsfolk as a mourner, face hidden beneath a black veil. The priest blessed the graves and she quietly made the sign of the cross, though she had long since abandoned God. Over the next 2 weeks, Mirage Blue continued their missions, cutting telephone lines, poisoning vehicle fuel, and spreading rumors of false Allied landing zones. Their most daring operation involved intercepting a German courier train and replacing documents outlining defense priority zones with forged maps from London. But the end came faster than any of them expected. June 6, 1944. D-Day That morning, before the sun had risen, the sky thundered with the engines of Allied planes. Paratroopers dropped like metal rain across the countryside. The roads became chaos. German officers shouted in panic. Entire companies were diverted, believing false intelligence planted by Mirage Blue. By the time the real beach landings began, Normandy's defenses were fractured and confused. The signal bell had done its job. But Jacqueline Ferrat never made it to see the Allies arrive. On June 5, the night before the invasion, her location was compromised. A double agent within the local resistance had betrayed Mirage Blue to the Gestapo. Her final known movements were recorded by a German officer, whose recovered notebook would be discovered in 1952 by a British historian. French woman. Code name, Violet Echo. Taken alive. Interrogated. Never revealed any names. Executed by pistol. Body dumped in Orne River. The rest of the Mirage Blue unit scattered. Tomasz joined a Polish armored division that later helped liberate Paris. Gaston became a demolition specialist for the Free French forces. The others vanished into civilian life, carrying their memories like scars. After the war, Mirage Blue was never publicly acknowledged. The documents were sealed, their actions folded into broader Allied success stories. No medals were awarded. No speeches made. But in Saint-Michel-du-Lac, the bell still rings twice every year on June 6th. Locals say it's just tradition. Most don't know why. But the old priest, now blind and wrinkled, still remembers the veiled woman who prayed beneath the crypt with a Bible in her hands. And far beneath the church, carved into the stone wall of the crypt, are 5 names scratched into the rock by candlelight. Names of those who rang the bells, sent the signals, and vanished like ghosts. Red snow the last winter of Stalingrad. The camera shakes slightly as it pans across a crumbling tenement, snow blowing violently through shattered windows. Smoke mixes with frost in the distance, where the Volga River groans under its icy shell. A narrator speaks in Russian, his voice aged, brittle. We were told to film truth. We filmed the end of the world. This is the beginning of the recovered film reels attributed to Mikhail Leonov, a 21-year-old Soviet cinematography student conscripted into a secret NKVD project during the winter of 1942. The project's name was classified, known only as Zimnye Oki, or Winter Eyes. Its goal, to document the defense of Stalingrad from within the besieged city, creating morale-boosting footage for future generations. But what Leonov and his small crew captured was never shown in theaters. The team consisted of 5 individuals: Leonov, his assistant Marina Dolina, sound engineer Grigory Aronov, technician Yuri Pestov, and NKVD minder Major Andrei Vishnevsky. They arrived in the city on December 1, 1942, aboard a smuggled supply barge that crossed the Volga under German artillery fire. Their cameras were packed in crates marked as machine parts, and their orders were clear: record combat, resilience, and the glory of the Soviet soldier. Yet as the days passed, the scripted shots became impossible. The streets were not held by proud defenders, but by shell-shocked teenagers clutching Mosin Nagants with frozen fingers. Civilians gnawed leather belts for food. Soviet officers executed their own men for retreating 5 steps under enemy fire. Leonov's footage became raw, uncontrolled. There is a reel labeled Children of House Number 11, showing 3 orphan siblings digging through snow to find the remains of a stray dog. Another, titled Window Light, captures a single mother using her last candle to warm her infant's fingers, singing to him softly as German shells scream in the background. The child died the next day, Leonov scribbled in the film log. Marina, the assistant, kept a personal journal, excerpts of which were discovered decades later and are read aloud in the documentary. Major Vishnevsky warned us today not to shoot the pile of frozen bodies near the tram depot. It looks bad, he said. But how can we lie? Our city is not defending, it is bleeding. One day, while filming in the ruins of a bombed apartment block, they stumbled across a group of Soviet snipers. One of them, a woman barely older than Leonov named Nina Malinovska, agreed to let them follow her. She had killed 56 German soldiers, and her face was hard, sunburnt, and eerily calm. In one sequence, Leonov films through a broken scope as Nina waits. The shot is long, silent. Snow drifts into the lens. Then, crack. A German soldier collapses from a rooftop across the street. Nina reloads without a word. After the war, Leonov would say in a fabricated interview, "It was the quiet before and after that broke me. The gunfire was easy. It was everything in between." The crew remained embedded with the 62nd Army, moving from building to building, documenting Soviet counterattacks and German assaults. Each scene was a masterpiece of agony. One reel shows a mortar team firing blindly from a basement, surrounded by amputated limbs and rats. Another captures a nurse boiling snow over a fire made from furniture legs to sterilize bandages soaked in pus and blood. But there was one moment that would haunt the archive for decades. On January 17, 1943, Major Vishnevsky was caught in a German bombing raid while attempting to evacuate a commander's last message. His body was found 2 days later, frozen upright against a brick wall, mouth open mid-command. Leonov filmed it. The shot zooms in slowly on the frost-covered insignia, the snow crusting on the man's eyes. No narration, just wind. With their NKVD minder gone, the crew was now unchained. They filmed everything. Grigory, the sound engineer, died of pneumonia on January 29th. They buried him under a destroyed statue of Lenin. Marina later wrote, "We used part of the camera tarp as his shroud. We could no longer feel sorrow, only function." By early February, the tide had turned. The German 6th Army, encircled, began to collapse. Emaciated Wehrmacht prisoners were marched through the snow in droves. In one surreal sequence, Leonov pans across a line of defeated Germans, boys and old men, flanked by Soviet soldiers so frostbitten they resembled corpses themselves. On February 2nd, the city fell silent. The fighting ceased. Victory had come. The crew had survived, but just barely. Yuri lost 3 toes to frostbite. Marina would later die in 1946 from tuberculosis. Leonov returned to Moscow with 46 reels of footage, a shell of the man who had once loved poetry and light. The film was reviewed by the NKVD and immediately classified. Morale damaging, visceral, unsuitable for public consumption. Only 2 minutes were ever shown on Soviet newsreels, carefully edited shots of cheering soldiers and red flags. The rest vanished into archives until 1991, when a stash of mislabeled canisters was discovered in a locked storeroom beneath the Lubyanka. Modern-day historians, analyzing the recovered footage, described it as perhaps the most human depiction of war ever committed to film, because it was not meant to be seen. They pieced together Leonov's story from journals, film notes, and interviews with distant relatives who said he never spoke of Stalingrad again. He died in 1983, alone, his last possession a rusted camera and a single photograph. Nina Malinovska, the sniper, smiling faintly in a moment of sunlight through the broken rafters. Red Snow ends with one final reel. The camera rests on a ruined square. Snow falls. A soldier, unaware of the lens, sits on the ground, eating cold soup. He looks up, straight into the camera, his face gaunt, his eyes empty. Then he smiles. Just for a moment. Then darkness. Beneath the rising sun, the Tokyo Cryptographers. The corridor beneath the Japanese Diet building was narrow, suffocating, and smelled faintly of iron and mildew. Few knew it existed. Fewer still dared enter it. Here, in this forgotten subterranean wing built during the Meiji era, Japan's most brilliant minds in linguistics, logic, and mathematics sat huddled over pages of ciphers and foreign radio transmissions. This was Unit 1142, the Imperial Japanese Army's top-secret cryptography division. It was not an official part of the military hierarchy. It did not wear uniforms. Most of its staff were women. Among them was Shimizu Aiko, a 19-year-old Tokyo University student whose thesis on Heian-era poetry had won awards before being abruptly replaced by war. In late 1943, She was taken from her dormitory at night by government officials and told her intellect was needed for the glory of the empire. She never returned home. The women of Unit 1142 were referred to only by numbers. Aiko was Agent 12. They were given basic food, threadbare futons, and access to a labyrinth of encrypted Allied transmissions. Their task was monumental: intercept, decrypt, and interpret. The women called themselves the Whispering Floor, though none dared say it aloud. Aiko was quiet, reserved, but relentless. She had a gift for patterns. While others required hours to decipher basic Navy messages, Aiko could see meaning in scattered fragments. Her mind danced through chaos like a brushstroke across silk. In February 1945, she intercepted a message marked, "Urgent, Manhattan Division, relocation imminent." It was mostly code, but 3 terms stood out: Trinity, uranium, and New Mexico. She circled the words in red ink and brought them to her superior, Commander Yamada. He dismissed her. American riddle. Irrelevant. But Aiko wasn't satisfied. That night, by oil lamp, she secretly copied fragments into a personal notebook hidden beneath the floorboards. She began assembling a web of references: Fat Man, Nagasaki, critical mass. She didn't know what it meant. Not entirely. But it was enough to unnerve her. Weeks passed. Rumors reached the cryptographers from guards. Tokyo was not invincible. The Americans were getting closer. B-29s roared overhead nightly, leaving fire in their wake. Some girls in Unit 1142 cried silently beneath their desks when the walls shook. Others whispered about suicide pills stored in the commander's office. One day in July, Aiko and another agent, Tanaka Fumiko, cracked a full line of a message between Los Alamos and the Pentagon. Device will detonate near dawn. Desert trial complete. Deployment scheduled before end of summer. The women froze. This wasn't about ordinary bombs. Aiko remembered a professor's lesson on theoretical chain reactions, the idea of splitting atoms to release energy beyond imagination. Could the Americans have achieved it? She took her findings to Yamada again. This time, he stared at the paper longer. "You overreach," he said quietly. "Even if this is true, it changes nothing. We die with honor." That night, Aiko contemplated leaving the compound. But where could she go? Her family home had been firebombed. Her brother was dead in Saipan. She was a ghost in a war that no longer cared who was right or brilliant or kind. On August 6, 1945, just before dawn, the corridor lights flickered. Static buzzed across their headsets. Then came silence. For nearly half an hour, the airwaves were quiet, a stillness none had ever heard. Then, a burst of frantic American communications. Impact confirmed. Massive yield. Target obliterated. Aiko and Fumiko looked at each other. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The next day, word reached them: Hiroshima had been annihilated. But no one used the word atomic. Not yet. On August 9th, it happened again. Nagasaki. And this time, the message traffic was deafening. Scientists, generals, politicians, all speaking in fearful reverence. Little boy. Fat man. Radiation. Manhattan Project. Aiko dropped her pen. Her hands trembled. Her mother had once lived in Nagasaki. She did not know if she had been visiting. On August 15th, the voice of Emperor Hirohito crackled over the radio, formal and ghostly. Japan would surrender. The war was over. Unit 1142 was dissolved within hours. All documents were to be burned. Records erased. The Whispering Floor swept clean. Several of the women disappeared in the chaos. Whether arrested, executed, or escaped was never confirmed. Aiko was taken by military police and interrogated for days. What had she read? What had she written? She remained silent. Eventually, they let her go. The Americans were coming. She returned to a ruined Tokyo. She lived in the shell of a train station for a time, surviving on rice rations. Her name, her work, her brilliance, none of it existed anymore. Decades later, in 1987, a historian named Professor Kenneth Lowell from Columbia University discovered a fragment of a Japanese notebook hidden in the false bottom of a diplomatic trunk once belonging to General Anami. It contained references to nuclear fission, Allied weapon development, and phrases like fallout radius and desert test. At the bottom was a name written in faint ink: Shimizu Aiko. The discovery shocked Cold War scholars. Could Japan have known what was coming? Could one woman, deep beneath Tokyo, have pieced together what the entire Japanese high command refused to believe? Aiko was never found. Her name does not appear in official post-war rosters. Some believe she died during the Tokyo firebombing. Others say she fled to the countryside, changed her name, and never spoke of war again. In 2010, a small stone plaque was placed near the Imperial Diet's foundations by an anonymous donor. It reads, Asterisk, to the women who listened in the dark and heard the future. Asterisk. No tourists stop to look. But every so often, a cherry blossom drifts down and lands softly on the stone. The iron violin music in the camps. The violin had only 3 strings. The 4th had snapped years ago, and there were no replacements in Auschwitz. Still, Eli Katz played. Not because he wanted to, but because he had to. Because the SS officers at the main gate demanded music as prisoners disembarked from the cattle cars, stumbling, starving, clutching children and rags. He stood at the head of the small orchestra, just beside the station platform, his hands trembling with cold. The music had to be cheerful, Mozart, Strauss, even polkas. The illusion of normalcy was essential. Behind the gates, smoke poured from chimneys. Eli had once performed in Vienna. A Jewish virtuoso by 16, he'd been a prodigy. In 1938, he played Tchaikovsky in Berlin, unaware that within months his name would be stripped from every program and poster. In 1942, he was arrested and sent to Auschwitz. His fingers blistered, his bones stuck out through his skin. But when a guard heard him humming a cello suite in the barracks, everything changed. He was pulled into a small, grim group, the Lagerkapelle, the concentration camp orchestra. These musicians were both cursed and privileged. They were fed slightly more, spared from the hardest labor. But they became tools of horror, forced to play as people marched to their deaths. The conductor, a German Jewish professor named Otto Weiss, tried to protect them. He altered scores to reduce tempo when prisoners walked too slowly. He taught his players to weep through their instruments without breaking rhythm. Eli hated every note. But within this torment, he began composing. In secret, on scraps of stolen paper and between the lines of old sheet music, he wrote new melodies. Not symphonies. Not defiant anthems. They were brief, fractured pieces, coded lullabies and weeping refrains, musical whispers no one else could hear. Each new piece was based on something he witnessed. A mother kissing her child before the selection line. A guard kicking a prisoner into a ditch. Snow falling on a body frozen in prayer. Eli named them in his mind: Elegy for Silent Mouths, The Walk of Smoke, asterisk 5 notes for 5 lost brothers. Asterisk. He scratched the notes into the underside of his violin's wood paneling. Tiny lines. Illegible to most. But the language of music was his rebellion. In early 1944, a Czech boy named Samuel Morgenstern was brought into the orchestra. He was only 14, a clarinetist, and could barely speak for days. But Eli watched him come alive again with the instrument, watched his hands regain life. They shared the same bunk, and Eli taught him the secret compositions. "I want to play what they can't hear," Samuel whispered once. "You will," Eli replied. Then came the day the orchestra was ordered to play for a visiting SS delegation. A concert was staged, chairs were polished, instruments tuned. Even the capos seemed nervous. Eli was told to perform solo. He played one of his secret pieces. The melody began with 3 innocent notes, a lullaby's echo, but it turned strange, dissonant, jarring like boots on ice. The audience, bored and half-drunk, did not notice. But Samuel, listening from behind the curtain, wept silently. After the performance, Ellie was taken aside by a junior SS officer. The man smiled too broadly. "That piece, was it yours?" Ellie nodded, unsure. "It reminded me of home," the officer said. "Do you have more?" That night, Ellie wrote down one full piece from memory. Prayer in the Ashes. He handed it over, convinced he had signed his death sentence. Instead, the officer requested another. Weeks passed. Ellie continued composing, carefully disguising the works as traditional Jewish laments. He taught Samuel to memorize them, note by note. They had a plan now. If Ellie died, the music would survive in Samuel's mind. But in January 1945, Auschwitz began to dissolve. The Soviet army was approaching. Orders came for a death march. Prisoners were forced out into the snow, driven westward to other camps. The orchestra, too, was broken apart. Ellie knew he would not survive the march. The night before departure, he gave Samuel the violin. "It only has 3 strings, Samuel whispered. "Then you'll play the silence," Ellie replied. They embraced. That was the last time Samuel saw him. In the blizzard days that followed, Samuel trudged through ice and blood, clutching the instrument beneath his coat. He was liberated by American forces near Buchenwald 3 weeks later. He was 15, 60 pounds, half-deaf in one ear. But he remembered the music. Samuel emigrated to England in 1948. He studied music at Cambridge, changed his name, rarely spoke of the war. But in 1962, he released an album of solo clarinet pieces. The liner notes were sparse, the titles strange: The Walk of Smoke, Prayer in the Ashes, Elegy for Silent Mouths. No one noticed at first. Critics praised the work, called it mournful, introspective. But one review, from a Holocaust survivor, simply said, "I have heard this before. In hell." Years later, Samuel donated the 3-string violin to the Yad Vashem Museum. Inside the hollowed body, they discovered the carvings, tiny lines etched with fingernails and broken pencils. Musical notation. Unreadable, but clearly deliberate. Historians puzzled over it. Forensic musicians began reconstructing the pieces. In 1999, a full suite was performed in Vienna titled The Iron Violin. The concert was held on Holocaust Remembrance Day. As the final note faded, there was no applause. Just silence. Some said they heard a 4th string in the sound. Ellie Katz was never found. No grave, no records. But in the ashen string, in notes written with the weight of death, his rebellion lived. Today, in a quiet hall in Jerusalem, the violin rests beneath glass. Tourists pass by. Some stop. Few understand what it means. But if you listen closely, you can almost hear the silence play back. Project Revenant, the V2, and the Manhattan Fear. It was the winter of 1945, and Berlin was crumbling. The Reich was collapsing on all fronts. Yet beneath a manor in the Harz Mountains, a secret project still burned with obsessive intensity. Code-named Project Revenant, it was the last gambit of a fractured empire. The architect of the project was Dr. Klaus Reinhardt, a physicist once considered a rival to Wernher von Braun. Exiled from Piemont in 1943 due to his aggressive, unsanctioned experiments, Reinhardt had not disappeared. Instead, he had quietly received funding from the SS' darkest inner circles, including Heinrich Himmler himself. Project Revenant was not just a weapon. It was a message. The goal: fit a V2 rocket with a dirty payload, a prototype radioactive device that, though not a true atomic bomb, would spread lethal isotopes over a wide radius. A psychological weapon. Radiation sickness instead of shockwaves. Panic instead of fire. According to fabricated Soviet archive footage, the project was built on scraps: uranium smuggled from captured Czech mines, tungsten from stolen Allied shipments, and data intercepted through Axis spies in Switzerland. Reinhardt's lab was makeshift, filled with unstable components, leaking cores, and desperate men. But it functioned. By February 1945, the prototype was almost complete. The war room was deep beneath Castle Falkenheim, a Gothic fortress turned research prison. A chalkboard held chilling words in block letters. They burned Hiroshima. We shall poison London. It was not yet known to Germany that the Americans had already built and tested an atomic bomb. Project Revenant was still chasing a ghost. But rumors had reached Berlin. The Americans had created something impossible in New Mexico. Reinhardt was determined to strike first, or die trying. Only a handful of people knew the project existed. One of them was Lieutenant Emil Fuchs, an Austrian communications officer assigned to the castle as a translator. Secretly, he was an Allied spy, a handler for the OSS planted months before. His reports, smuggled out via encrypted Morse pulses, grew increasingly urgent. March 3, 1945. Germans attempting radiological weapon. Not a full A-bomb. Likely V-2, adapted for dispersion. Launch window, imminent. The message landed on the desk of Brigadier General Miles Newcomb, a British intelligence officer in charge of counter V-2 operations. London had endured hell from the rockets, over 9,000 casualties, and countless sleepless nights. If Reinhardt succeeded in launching Revenant, even just one, the psychological effect could be catastrophic. British War Cabinet minutes from March 7 record this entry. Should the Germans poison the Thames with nuclear residue, the pressure for retaliatory atomic deployment will become unmanageable. We must prevent the launch. A covert mission was authorized. Operation Grey Glass ***. Led by Major Anna Shepard, a former archaeologist turned demolition expert, Grey Glass was tasked with locating and destroying the Revenant facility before launch. They parachuted into the Harz on March 13 under heavy flak, carrying only silenced Sten guns, plastic explosives, and a cyanide capsule each. They reached Castle Falkenheim on the 15th. The interior was worse than expected. The lower levels were irradiated. Technicians were vomiting blood, their skin blotched with burns. Reinhardt, gaunt and wild-eyed, barely acknowledged the symptoms. History remembers only the first, he rasped, pointing at a cracked blackboard filled with equations. The rocket stood in the chamber like a black god. Almost ready. Fuchs, the OSS spy, managed to guide Shepard's team through the castle's servant passages. At 3:10 on March 16, they placed demolition charges at key structural points, including the rocket's fueling station. But they were discovered. The final battle was chaos, gunfire in hallways, echoes in stone, blood on ancient carpets. Fuchs was shot through the chest. Shepard personally gunned down Reinhardt in the control room, his last words. You'll see, they will use it before the year is out. Shepard ordered the charges detonated. Castle Falkenheim collapsed into itself, burying Project Revenant in flame and ash. The rocket never launched. The team lost 6 members. Only 3 escaped through a forest rendezvous. Their names were scrubbed from records. The operation was sealed under eyes-only classification until 1985. But Reinhardt's words lingered. In August 1945, when Hiroshima and Nagasaki were obliterated by American atomic bombs, Shepard reportedly wept, not out of guilt, but vindication. The Americans had built their Revenant, and they had launched it. Later that year, during the Nuremberg trials, mention of radiological weapons was suppressed. No official inquiry into Revenant was ever held. The Allies feared revealing just how close Germany had come. The Cold War was beginning. Nuclear terror had shifted from possibility to doctrine. In 1972, a Soviet expedition uncovered partial blueprints near the Falkenheim ruins. The diagrams bore Reinhardt's signature, handwritten on the side. War is not about who is right, only who strikes first. Today, the ruins of Castle Falkenheim lie behind rusted barbed wire in the Harz, marked as unsafe due to unstable soil. Tourists are discouraged. But once a year, on March 16th, a single red flower appears at the overgrown gate. No one knows who leaves it. Some say it's for the victims. Others say it's for the dead scientist, a man driven mad by fear of being second. But those who've studied the blueprints know, Revenant was real. And it was closer than anyone dared admit. Project Revenant was destroyed before it could strike, but its shadow lived on. Less than 5 months later, the world watched Hiroshima burn. What Reinhardt dreamed in madness, the Allies delivered in silence. In trying to stop a monster, did we become one? Some doors, once opened, never close.